Hello, my name is Steve O'Reilly, and this is Roma Locuta Est Considers. What is RomaLocutaEst.com, you may well ask yourself. Well, it's a wee humble blog that the world little notes, nor will long remember. It's devoted to apologetics and commentary on Catholic topics, current events, and general Christian apologetics. We do not seek, we do not accept donations. No funding is received from any source. We're beholden to no one. We alone are responsible for the content. Okay, so this is episode 12 of Roma Locuta Est Considers. We're still looking at Benepapism, and this is part 3 of a 3-part series on the Ratzinger Code. Okay, as I said, this is part 3, and just to recap what we've done so far, in the first video, part 1, we looked at the question, what is Plan B? We also looked in part 1 at what is the Ratzinger Code. We also addressed the munus versus the ministerium and pointed folks to a series of videos that I've already done on that question where we looked at that in detail. Also in part 1 we applied some common sense to the question of Plan B in the Ratzinger Code, and then in part 2, our second video, we examined a prime example of the Ratzinger Code in action. And then now, here in part 3, we're going to look at the Ratzinger Code and cognitive dissonance. We're going to look at, I think, a humorous example of Andrea Cianci applying his hermeneutical approach of the Ratzinger Code to some things that George Gonswain, or Georg Gonswain, said about some Benepapists in Italy. Okay, the Ratzinger Code and cognitive dissonance. We're going to look here now at an example of the lengths to which the Ratzinger Code hermeneutic is used or employed to maintain the narrative that Benedict had intentionally submitted an invalid resignation. This will show, in fact, the desperate lengths to which the Ratzinger Code will be employed to kind of save the sinking narrative. So I hope you enjoy it. It is pretty amusing. Okay, onwards with our story of cognitive dissonance on display regarding the Ratzinger Code hermeneutic. And this will involve a couple articles that appeared on Brother Alexis Bignolo's blog from Rome, and an article by Andrea Cianci as well. So we start though with one of the articles on the From Rome site, Brother Bignolo's blog, and it's entitled Archbishop Gonswain calls Don Munatella a nut. And this story involves around Archbishop Gonswain's brother Helmut Gonswain, and I forget which way the phone calls went here, but Don Munatella is a famous Benepapist, Italian Benepapist, and he's written a book on the topic in favor of that theory. And there's a group of 7 priests who are associated with him, who are like-minded. So there's like 8 of them all together. They formed a group, and my understanding is they wrote, I think, some sort of letter to Gonswain, Archbishop Gonswain, kind of saying, "Hey, what's going on with at the time, who they believed Pope Benedict XVI, was Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI." But anyway, they kind of wrote a letter to him, and this ended up with a phone call. Again, I forget which way it went, but there was a phone call from Gonswain's brother, and he was, I think, chatting with one or more of these priests. And during that call, Archbishop Gonswain actually got on the receiver and said some things. Now, on that call, in this article that appeared on Brother Bignolo's site, I think Brother Bignolo wrote the article, probably based on his discussions with one or more of these priests. I don't have it handy. I just have these screenshots at this point. But amongst the accusations that, amongst the things that Gonswain said, he made a number of what I think Brother Bagnolo called declarations. So the first of these was a quote. This is a quote from Gonswain apparently. Don Munatella is a nut, and he who follows him is also a nut. Then Gonswain's second declaration on this phone call was Munatella is a theological nut. I'm sorry, Munatella is theologically out of his mind. That's the second declaration. The third declaration was his book, Don Munatella, as I mentioned, has written a book. So his book, Peter, Where Are You?, is not worth even the paper it is printed on. And then Gonswain's fourth declaration was Pope Benedict has appeared many times with Pope Francis and is totally faithful to Pope Francis. And then continuing, there are more declarations. I only quote 7 of them here. I forget how many they went on. There might have been a dozen or more declarations, but these are just some of the important ones I thought. So the fifth declaration that Gonswain apparently made on this phone call was, Pope Benedict has never mentioned any other name in the canon of the Mass. So that's important because which pope does he name in the Mass? So apparently it's Francis. Pope Benedict's, Gonswain's sixth declaration was Benedict has also never named himself in the canon. All right, there you go. He has not named himself. So he doesn't name himself as Pope in the canon of the Mass when he says it. And then the seventh declaration is he, Benedict, has never put in doubt the validity of Pope Francis's election. Again, those are all the declarations we need to cover for the purpose of looking at the cognitive dissonance. Okay, so we went through kind of just what I wanted to show from the first article. Then there was a second article on From Rome. Again, that's Brother Alexis Bagnolo's blog, and this has to do with an appeal to Archbishop Gonswain from Catholic clergy in communion with Christ's Vicar on earth. And here, this is that group of priests led by Don Munatella, and in communion with who they believe is Pope at the time. Pope Benedict XVI is who that's the reference to. So this is a video. These two priests. This is Don Munatella here on the left here, and these two priests. I think this is Father Gebhard is with him, and they are giving a video presentation. So while that video presentation there's a video presentation, and the article is Brother Bagnolo is transcribing it apparently, and creates that, or he transcribed that video, which apparently I think was like in German and Italian. I think Father Gebhard was German and had the German, and then Don Munatella, of course, is speaking in Italian, and then Brother Bagnolo, listening to it, is transcribing it into his article into the English. So here he gives a little bit of the background. The appeal has been made, and this appeal was made in response to the comments left by Monsignor Gonswain, Archbishop Gonswain, in a phone call made by his brother Helmut to the brother of Father Gebhard, who's one of the 8 priests I referred to earlier, who publicly declared to recognize Pope Benedict XVI as Vicar of Christ still on account of never having intended to abdicate. Okay, so I here is Brother Bagnolo. Brother Bagnolo says, I will summarize as I listen. So this post, he's listening to that video with Don Munatella and Father Gebhard. He's saying, I will summarize as I listen, so this post will be updated in the next few minutes. The video is in Italian with a German translation by Father Gebhardt. The primary speaker is Don Alessandro Minutella, pastor of St. John Bosco, Palermo, who has been ruthlessly persecuted by his Archbishop in Palermo and by members of the hierarchy collaborating with the anti-Pope Jorge Bergoglio, also known as Pope Francis. Okay, so continuing on, this is Brother Brignolo transcribing the video conference as he's listening to it, and this is, so again, Brother Brignolo writing, but he's transcribing what others are saying. So we receive a telephone call from the brother of Monsignor to the brother of Father Gebhardt Villepend, and we made known the contents of this phone call, the contents of which were very upsetting. So what they heard from Monsignor, I don't mean to laugh, what they heard from Monsignor Gonswain, I guess, was pretty upsetting. In summary, the phone call. So here it comes. Here's the summary of the phone call. Don Minutella is a nut, theologically out of his mind. Those are some of the declarations we saw in that last article. His book is not worth the paper it is written on. That Pope Benedict is totally faithful to Pope Francis. That he, Benedict, names not himself but Pope Francis in the canon of the Mass. That there are errors in the Declaratio, but that it remains valid. This communication was like a kick in the legs, to use a metaphor from soccer. The telephone call ended with by asking Father Gebhardt to seek spiritual counsel to avoid further canonical penalties. We 8 priests decided to make known the contents of this letter. We did this because for the love of the truth and so that everyone might come forth into the light of day. Let's see, what else? Okay, skipping on here. These faithful remain perplexed at the statements made in this call by the Monsignor, that's Archbishop Gonswain, because it is shocking that a personal secretary of the Holy Father respond in such an offensive, especially the calumnious statements made against me. The me here is Don Minutella. So clearly these 8 priests were offended by what Archbishop Gonswain said, right? He basically, they according to them, Gonswain called Don Minutella a nut, theologically out of his mind. His book on Benepapism isn't worth the paper it's written on. And then Gonswain then goes on to say that Benedict is faithful to Francis, that Benedict named Francis in the canon of the Mass, not himself, so Francis as the Pope in the canon of the Mass, and so forth, and that Don Minutella considers what Gonswain said calumnious in regard to his person. So clearly these are very negative comments by Gonswain in the opinion of these 8 priests, including Don Minutella. And what's important is that there are some revelations here which stab at the very heart of Benepapism. So you can see why this would be concerning to someone who's a Benepapist, for those Benepapists who believe that Gonswain is close to Benedict, someone like Chauncey. So let's see what's next here. Okay, this is where I think it starts getting humorous. Again, you have Brother Brignolo is transcribing this video. He's watching Father Gebhardt, Don Minutella, where they're conversing or talking about this phone conversation where Archbishop Gonswain got on the receiver and made some pretty brutal assessments, in his view, of Don Minutella. I think I read through some what those were, that Gonswain apparently had said that Don Minutella is a nut, or he's theologically crazy, or words to that effect, and that his book Don Minatella's book on Benepapism is not worth the paper that it's written on. Um, and John Swain had made other comments that, like Benedict, as former Pope, read Francis's name as the Pope in the canon of the Mass and not his own. So a lot of things that would undermine the Benepapist position. And this is where I guess the the priests in the video started talking about Chauncey. They must have contacted Chauncey in relation to this phone call. So here Bignolo tells us what the priests are talking about Chauncey's involvement now. So Bignolo writes, Andrea Chauncey holds that the Monsignor, Archbishop of Gonswain, is a faithful collaborator of the Holy Father and is speaking under the conditions of a sede impedita, in which he must speak in a code, not openly, to protect the Holy Father. So this is interesting, right? I mean, certain Benepapists kind of view Gonswain as a bad guy. I think that's all ridiculous, but Chauncey and I guess the Ratzinger Code types, at least up to this point, Chauncey believed that Archbishop Gonswain was a close collaborator and friend, trustworthy friend of then Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, and so therefore his comments on that phone call are pretty devastating if taken at face value. I mean, again, he said that Benedict read Francis's name in the Mass, that Benedict or Gonswain had said that Minatella is, like I said, a nut, and in Gonswain's opinion is a nut and theologically crazy, or words to that effect, and that his book is not worth the paper that's written on. All those things. So how do you explain that? But we see here that Chauncey's saying that that Gonswain must be speaking in a code here. So let's see how Andrea Chauncey explains away these things that Gonswain said, which are pretty brutal. Chauncey last night gave a very sophisticated and educated rereading of the comments, showing that the meaning of the Monsignor's words are intended to be understood contrariwise as an approval and an encouragement of the work of Don Minatella and the priests and faithful who collaborate with him. That must have been a very sophisticated and educated rereading of the comments. I mean, Gonswain, if thinking back a few slides, Gonswain had apparently called Minatella a nut, according to the previous article that I was citing from, that he had said, where's the effect that Minatella is theologically crazy, that his book is not worth the paper it's written on. So here, Chauncey, to save Gonswain as a close collaborator of Benedict, comes and says that his words should be understood contrariwise, as not meaning what they said, but meaning the exact opposite of what they actually literally meant. So anyway, but Bignolo continues, the priests want to make known that they respect the work and opinions of Andrea Chauncey, but they remain perplexed with the response of the Monsignor. You can understand why. And the possibility that Chauncey is right actually creates more confusion for the simple faithful. So this is, I think, kind of amusing that you have Gonswain kind of brutally making some brutal statements about Don Minutella. And then Chauncy comes along and says, no, they actually should be understood contrary-wise. So let's see what else we might find out here. All right, so we saw Bagnolo's transcription where the priests are talking about how Chauncy provided this educated and sophisticated explanation of what Ganswain meant, and it meant contrary-wise to how it sounded. So they were pretty upset. Don Minutella thought Ganswain's statements were calumnious. So what did Chauncy say? Well, Chauncy wrote an article that kind of touched upon this stuff. I'll just provide an excerpt here. I kind of discuss this incident in my article down here, Ratzinger Code, don't believe your lying eyes. That's in reference to these brutal statements that Ganswain said, and then Chauncy coming along and say, no, they mean the opposite. So don't believe your lying eyes as to what this all means. And that's what led to the back and forth between Chauncy and I on the Pontifice Sommo and all that. And so I suggest if you get a chance, you can screenshot this screen and or put it on pause and go find these articles. So I think it's pretty funny. Anyway, so in this article here, Chauncy in Liber Quotidiano wrote this article, and I'm not going to discuss the whole thing, even though my article down here does discuss his whole article here. I won't go into all of that, but this one part here I thought was kind of amusing on the whole Ganswain comment thing. So this is now Chauncy speaking. About 2 weeks ago, Bishop Ganswain, in a phone call with a German Begolian priest, came up with a series of phrases that apparently seem very harsh towards Don Minutella and the other 7 priests faithful to Benedict of the Marian priestly sodality. So that's the name of the group I think these eight priests call themselves. However, whereas on a more careful reading, these expressions turn out to be resounding praise for these priest heroes. And then Chauncy gives an example of how he turns this around. He goes, for example, Monsignor Ganswain declared that Don Minutella is theologically crazy. And how does Chauncy get out of that? He says, but since Jesus explicitly forbids calling one's brother crazy on pain of being thrown into Gehenna, that's in Matthew 5:22, this expression takes up again univocally the madness in Christ, the theological theme, in fact, of which St. Paul speaks in a letter to the Corinthians. So he takes what is quite clearly the obvious, meaning that these are brutal assessments in Ganswain's opinions of Don Minutella and his 7 priests of the Marian priestly sodality. Yet, and don't forget he was called a nut too by Ganswain, and that his book was said to be not worth the paper it was written on, and here Chauncy says no, that's not what it means, and and tries to convince them the opposite. So I can't help but chuckle at the picture of all this. Chauncy sets out to convince these 8 priests that no means yes and black means white. So I just find this very, very amusing. All right, so what do we say? We can say in the Ratzinger Code, we are witnesses to a textbook case of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance turned all the way up to 11. For the folks out there who understand the reference to Spinal Tap there. Earlier, we saw the failure of Chauncy's interpretation of Pontifice Sommo, and then his attempt to turn around that failure into success not previously allowed by the Ratzinger Code. Remember, he said there's simply no such thing as a Pontifice Sommo in reference to the Pope, and he was dead wrong. And then he said, well, it's rare, and it's a rare and archaic usage. Well, it may be rare to Cianci, but it wasn't rare to Benedict. I mean, he was a eminent theologian, erudite theologian, as Cianci admitted. So, I in a little bit of searching found or provided 7 quick examples of Benedict as Ratzinger, the theologian, undoubtedly had seen this probably in other texts, ancient or otherwise, but it was a usage known to him, and therefore he understood that it referred to the Pope, and therefore he could use the term without it meaning anything else. Now we just retreated to a rather bizarre and unintentionally humorous example of cognitive dissonance in a group of articles written by Signor Cianci and Brother Bagnolo. In this new example, Cianci used his Ratzinger Code hermeneutical approach. Cianci tried to convince Don Menatello and 7 priests that Archbishop Gonswain's message to them, which the 8 priests described and considered to be insultingly harsh, crude, and calumnious, but instead he convinced them, or wanted to instead convince them, that the message was one of approval and encouragement. That it should be understood contrary-wise. And I think it's just too funny to believe. Anyway, these are clear examples of cognitive dissonance. It is clear, it is obvious, and amusing for those with the eyes to see and the ears to hear. These examples of the Pontifice Sommo and Gonswain's phone conversation show there is no Ratzinger Code in reality. No matter how sincere Mr. Cianci is, and I believe he is sincere, the reality is there is no Ratzinger Code. It is a figment of the imagination, wanting to maintain the erroneous narrative that Benedict XVI remained the true Pope until his death. Bottom line is, there is no Ratzinger Code. Okay, we're approaching the end of the video here. If you're looking for some resources that make arguments against Benepapism, please check out these resources. You can put the video on pause. In terms of books, there's what I've mentioned before. There's my book, Valid, The Resignation of Pope Benedict XVI. There's various articles out there. You can check out my blog, Rumble Q to Est, where I have a number of article compilations. Also a recent article that appeared on 1 Peter 5 entitled Whither Benepapism. Ryan Grant has a great article also at 1 Peter 5 on Benepapism. Father John Rickert has written 4 great articles on the topic. Dr. Edward Fieser has also written a couple articles, and John Salsa has, I think, about 7 articles on the topic. Okay, before we go, just a reminder, I'm working on a trilogy entitled Pia Fidelis. Book 1 of the trilogy is out, Pia Fidelis, The Two Kingdoms. It's a trilogy set in during the midst of the Arian crisis and the rise and ultimately fall of Julian the Apostate, an interesting historical character. Also, please check out my book, Valid, The Resignation of Pope Benedict XVI. There I look at all the Benepapist arguments and refute them. And then in terms of my next video, I think I'll do it on Gonswain's speech. And then after that, I'll probably do a few other videos on some more minor issues, but I think that should pretty much cover Benepapism after that. I want to thank you all for watching. If you've liked this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. But if you didn't like it, feel free to hit the thumbs down, as I'm sure you will, and don't subscribe. But again, thank you for your attention and for sticking through this 3-part series. Thank you.